Yeah, it's mindset cafe, we all about that mindset. Gotta stay focused, never settle for less. It's all in your head, how you think you manifest. So get ready to rise, cause we about to be the best. Gotta switch it up, gotta break the old habits. Get your mind right, turn your dreams into habits. No negative
What
vibes,
is
only
up,
positive
guys? Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Cafe podcast. It is your boy Devin, and today we are honored to have Christopher Pellegrini on today with you guys. He's going to share some really interesting insights, and honestly, I was just telling him it's a first for us because he's over there in Tokyo, Japan. So it's 1:30 in the morning over there, and that's believe me, that's crazy that he's still able to talk and really dive into this and provide you guys value. So make sure you guys do the same and really reciprocate the love and share this episode with a friend and give us that 5-star review. But Christopher, is globally recognized as an expert in Japanese spirits, right? From shochu to amori to koju-based, Japanese spirits. He is also the founder of Hanaku Spirits. I don't know if I said that right, Chris.
Honkaku.
Okay. So, and when he's been based out in Tokyo since 2002, right? He's had some amazing aspects to his journey, right? From being a judge, basically for judging for distilled sake on air, and he's written books. He's a podcaster, but also it's just one of those things where he has adapted so many things in so many aspects in his life that I know he's going to bring so much value to you guys today. So, with that being said, Christopher, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Devin. It's a true pleasure to be here with you right now.
No, thank you. Let's dive in a little. Let's start with your journey, right? What inspired you to really dive into the world of, spirits, let alone Japanese spirits?
The short answer, well, how did I get to Japan? The easy answer is I followed a girl.
Okay.
That's just how it worked out. I was dating someone and they really wanted to live in Japan. And I was like, cool, I would love to see how you operate outside of your comfort zone for once, because I was the perennial foreigner. I'd lived in Spain, and then I met her in Korea, and then she wanted to move to Japan. I was like, great, let's do that. But if we back up a few years, actually quite a few years, I grew up in Bristol, Vermont, and I was a hill country kid, and I think one thing you'll find from my life story as we talk through this today is that I'm sort of the type of person who jumps first and asks questions on the way down. and also with that, I'm the type of person who, once I become very invested in or curious about something, it's very difficult to prevent my forward momentum. It's just naturally going to keep going. And you can say or do whatever you want. I'm going to figure this out. As part of a U.S. history class when I was in high school, I was supposed to be studying a period in the 19-teens. And I figured out that at that time during Prohibition, everybody was making their own alcohol at home. To teenage me, that was intensely interesting.
Right.
And so I diverted all of my energy to studying that instead. And it turned out that you can make alcohol at home as long as everything's clean. And I thought, well, I can do that. And they were selling beer kits at the local beverage redemption center of all places. So I figured that out, got my own kit, got all the buckets and everything. And I started homebrewing when I was a teenager. This, of course, was a secret. It ended up being a pretty lucrative secret. I ended up selling some of our stuff to me, and a very close friend of mine did this together, and sold it to our friends, sold it to some of our teachers. And then one day my parents found out, and I was all of a sudden the worst son on the face of the planet, and nearly got crucified. But I ended up taking what I had learned and the passion that I had developed to a local microbrewery called Otter Creek in Middlebury, Vermont, and sort of talked my way into that an apprenticeship there, even though I was still in high school. And one fateful week, the top brewer and the second brewer, the top brewer wrecked his back, so he couldn't lift 50-pound bags of grain. And the second brewer left Vermont to join the damn circus. I shit you not. That is complete truth. And so all of a sudden, the CEO is like, "Do we have anybody up in this joint who knows how to make beer?" And 17-year-old me was like, "Hello." And that's how I became the youngest commercial brewer in the United States, too young to drink what I was making. And that developed in me a very, very intense nerdiness for small batch, handmade craft beer that people would line up to fill their growlers with, you know? And I was a kid. I was the most annoying underage beer snob you've ever met in your entire life, that you will ever meet in the history forever. But I ended up, years later in Japan, and I followed my girlfriend, now my wife. It worked out. It was a good gamble, high risk, high reward. And I ran into Japan's indigenous spirits, one of them being shochu, shochu. Just pronounce it like the verbs show me how you chew, like you would say to a kid, show me how you chew your food. I don't know. Do people say that to their kids? Maybe they do.
I don't think so, but
I hope not. That means they're chewing with their mouths open, and we don't want to teach that. But anyways, we I just was blown away by the depth of the indigenous spirits over here. And for me, they really resonated as the craft beer of the spirits world. And that was in 2003. And I've just been tumbling down that rabbit hole ever since. And it's changed my life. It literally completely turned my entire existence on its head.
no, I mean, honestly, that story is it's so crazy and so inspiring because one, I first have to ask the question, right? Because I'm really curious. Like you said, you were too young to drink what you were even brewing, right?
Mhm.
Is that something that was being done under the table? Is that even like a lot? Like, can you legally brew when you're not of age? Like,
In
I don't know.
Vermont, you can. You
Okay,
can legally brew underage as long as you don't consume. And that,
okay.
of course, was all checked before they let me up on the brewing tower to take control of that part of production. But yeah, legally you can, as long as you don't taste it. But of course, at the same time, I was the first line of defense against a bad batch. So
So how
no
does that work?
comment, but
So how does
um,
that work? You know what I mean? That's funny though.
yeah.
That's crazy though. But that really shows you though that if you have a niche or you have a passion for something and you really start doing it, you have to keep your mind open because like you were doing it in your room, and you had a lucrative, underground kind of business. You had your own, back in the day, basically speakeasy style distillery, right? And then it was like, okay, you got caught. Like you could either have been like, okay, I'm gonna get a regular job, or it's like, how do I take the next step? How do I make this an actual thing? Right. So it really shows your journey just so far. It really just shows that, if you really like something and you really have a passion for it, it may not work one way, right? But it doesn't mean that's the only way. And keeping your mind open and doing that, and then that led you to where you are now in Japan. And it's like, again, you could have been like, no, I'm a micro brewer. Like I only do this. But it's like, no, you had the passion for essentially you're an artist, right? And you really create an art and basically a masterpiece out of these, spirits. And it was like, oh wow, look, there's another opportunity, right? And you just kept your mind open. So I think that's so awesome, and people need to realize that sometimes one door closes, or one door doesn't ever open, and it's okay because there's literally a window right next to it that you just are refusing to at least peek inside, right?
Yeah,
So let's dive in a
100%.
little bit. No, so let's dive in a little bit. Like, so you moved to Japan, right?
Mhm.
And what was that process like, right? In terms of you were following your girlfriend at the time, now wife, and
Mhm.
what was the reasoning like for the move? Because I mean, obviously you already had a life, to a degree built out, in Vermont, and then it was like, okay, I'm gonna uproot everything and not just follow my girlfriend, but essentially, you took a risk on that, but you also took just a full lifetime change. So what was the reasoning or the mindset behind, wanting to just uproot and, start fresh somewhere else?
Yeah, I think the honest answer to that is just I wanted to see if our relationship would work. And I knew, because I had lived abroad in different contexts and different cultures, that it was going to be a great stress test for our relationship. And just like traveling with somebody that you're dating, like, go ahead, get in a car, go on a 5-day camping journey where you got to drive hundreds of miles, and there's all this stuff that you guys got to figure out together. And if you guys survive that, that's good for at least several more months, And I really liked her, and I just wanted to see, is this worth all of the time and effort that I hope that it is? And she suggested it. She suggested running straight into the buzzsaw of culture shock, which is what happens anytime you move to a new community, a new context. And I had done it so many times before. I was like, I know how to navigate this. I don't know where I'm going or where I'm going to end up, but I know how to deal with it, deal with the uncertainty, deal with the unknowns, adjust to things that I recognize, understand that I'm not going to understand. I'm not even going to be aware of most of the things that are out there, right? All the cultural cues, the deep stuff, and I was ready to accept that as just the default, way of living my life. And she was not. So it ended up being a good test, because she was not herself for a good 7 or 8 months. And we nearly broke up 3 times a day. And, and it was good because we worked through it together, and it ended up making us a stronger duo. But I mean, the whole, in the meantime, the way that she was able to exist here was through something called what's it called? A working holiday visa. I think some nations have this treaty where young people from both sides can go to the other place for 1 year and get a working holiday visa. I don't think the United States has that with Japan, or it didn't at that time. So I simply remained in education. I was in education in the States, and then I was in education in Korea, and then I was teaching at a university in Japan. So I kind of just stayed in education in that respect. So it was a little bit easier for me in that there weren't so many guardrails on what I was allowed to do. But anyways, we both got 1-year visas, and we moved over here together, and we stayed in a tiny flat, and it was wild. It was wild. It was just completely new context, completely new cultural cues. I mean, anytime you graduate from university, you join a firm, and the culture shock that comes with that, just fish out of water, learning the rules, all the hidden assumptions that you don't get for the first 2 years. And just, you're the rook. You're completely unprepared for this, and nobody wants you to be prepared for this. And that's what moving to another country is like too. I mean, the first couple of weeks, you're like, this is great. It's a honeymoon. It's amazing. And then all of a sudden reality hits. And then how do you deal with that reality? Yeah, that's where you learn what you're made of. And it obviously helps if you've been through it before, which I had. So I had a distinct advantage over her. But she made it through. We made it through, and we're still here today, 20 something years later. So,
That's awesome. So now that you guys have moved to, Japan, and you guys are working through, right? What was that first door that opened into the spirits, and basically getting into Japanese spirits for you?
I moved here without the intention of being here for more than a year. So I didn't really study the language before I got here, which I regret. And I quickly ran into these drinks because I tend to look for drinks everywhere I go. And it really kind of flipped my entire understanding of the spirits world upside down. And then all of a sudden, I ran into one of those situations where I was intensely curious about something. And this was 2003. Wikipedia did not have a blessed thing to say about Japanese shochu. And I don't even know if Wikipedia was more than like a couple of years old at that point. But anyway, there was no information about this stuff, but I had run into it unwillingly at an izakaya, a Japanese gastropub that specializes in sake, which is not a spirit. And the guy was bored, so he decided to just mess with me and give me something that I didn't order, which ended up changing my life. And by the end of this night, where I was just tasting these really interesting spirits, I'm like, where do they make this stuff? And through our broken communication, I spoke no Japanese, he spoke no English, but we figured it out. And he said Kyushu, and I'm like, I've heard of that island. That's like south. He's like, yep. How far? 2 hours. Oh, I can go by train. He's like, no, 2 hours by plane. I was like, okay, got it. And the next weekend I was off, and my girlfriend was, she was like, where are you going? I'm like, I got something I got to figure out. So I got to go down there. I ended up in Kagoshima, Japan without a plan, with like, I didn't have a smartphone. I had one of the old flip phones. This is 2003, and just rock up into rural Kagoshima. And I had been able to assemble enough knowledge that I knew kind of where a couple of shochu distilleries were. Walked up to them, knock on the door. They open the door. I'm like, hi, can I see? And they're like, fuck off. They're like, no, go turn right around. Who are you and why are you here? And so that I dealt with that for a lot of the beginning of my visits down south, where all of the shochu is made. Down in Kagoshima Prefecture, which is smaller than Connecticut, has 108 active shochu distilleries, which is more distilleries per capita than Scotland, Tennessee, and Kentucky combined. It's insane the amount of shochu production that's going on down there. And so I didn't have to search far for more places and more doors to knock on. And eventually, because I wasn't there just for the afternoon, I would stay for the weekend, and I would drink locally, and people would be like, okay, we've heard about you. All right. And so word got out, and they're like, there's an American kid here. He's harmless. He used to work in a beer brewery. He's really fascinated by shochu, and he wants to see how it's made. So somebody should hopefully let him in. And one day somebody did. And then I was like, whoa, this is not what I expected, because the fermentation style is completely different from what we're used to in the West. It's just a completely different highway to getting to the finished product. And that just took me on a whole nother, it was just insane. I was like, there's no hot side to this. There's no kettle. There's no mash tun. There's no lauter tun. How do you sacrifice the starches into sugar? I don't get, chemically, I don't understand how this works. And they have this magic mold in Japan, which is used to make sake and miso and soy sauce and all of their indigenous spirits, which I had no idea about. And so it was just, part of it was, I was so enthralled by how new it all was. And then it was the people, and the people were great. And I loved them, and I couldn't communicate with them very well, but they were so lovely to me. And they're like, oh, you're not a bad person. You're really interested in this. And so I was eating dinner with them in their homes, and I was helping in the distillery when they were short staffed. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I might have just found a shortcut to community here, which I've heard is impossible. And so I kept going down, and I'm making friends and learning, like physically learning, like by being on the floor and doing what I had done in Vermont, but with it in a totally different way of creating alcohol. And it was the coolest thing that ever happened to me. And I became intensely, even more passionate about it. I had found my craft beer in Japan that wasn't beer at all. It was a spirit made from sweet potatoes and barley and water chestnuts and like all these other, 53 approved ingredients. And it just knocked me for a serious loop. And I haven't recovered from it. And I've devoted my entire life to it because it's the coolest thing I think I could have ever found. And it's just because I kept asking questions. And when I didn't get the answers that I wanted, I kept going. I kept digging. And then eventually I found the motherlode. I just found all these great people doing all of these amazing things very locally. And now I'm very fortunate because I get to call them friends. So I'm a very, very lucky human. I took some good chances, and I was rewarded for my curiosity. It doesn't always work out that way, but eventually you get the ball bounces in your directions every once in a while.
No, I think what's really important is you weren't just rewarded for your curiosity, you're rewarded for your consistency, right? Because, knocking on one door, two doors, 10 doors, right? And it's easy to get discouraged, right? In life, in business, and, anything new. And especially going into a place where you can't communicate, completely with someone, and you're just trying to explain, it's similar to someone only giving you 30 seconds to basically, give an elevator pitch,
Elevator
right?
pitch. Yep.
You know, and it's like you get discouraged because you got turned down. Maybe that person wasn't going to be the right person that opened door number one. They wouldn't have showed you or explained it to, in a way, or let you work on the floor that, has to open these doors.
Right.
Right. So sometimes it takes that consistency to get aligned with the person you were meant to be aligned with. Right. So I think that it really does hold weight, and it shows that anyone can do it, but you have to be willing to put in the work, right? The ball can only bounce back if you continue to throw it and, hit the spot where it bounces back. But if you're throwing it at a backboard and missing every time, then it's not going to bounce back, right? So going into that a little bit, right? What is for those that don't know in the spirits, I mean, because I'll be honest, I'm very basic on my, spirits and alcohol knowledge, but what is the difference between like shochu and amori and, basically compared to like whiskey or vodka or, things of that nature?
Super. Yeah, I'll keep it very simple because this can get nerdy. Shochu and awamori, Japan's indigenous spirits, are made from approved ingredients, and they're koji. Now, koji, and I know this is incredibly sexy, is Japan's indigenous mold, and it is used to make everything fermented other than beer here that is delicious and has umami. So soy sauce, miso, mirin, sake, and everything that we're talking about right now. It's a starch conversion mechanism, much like malting in the Western world. They don't use malting here. They use this mold to convert starches into sugars. Now, what shochu is approved ingredients and their koji, and then it is pretty cool, I think, when compared to international spirits because of two reasons. Number one, no additives ever. It's strictly prohibited. And it's not like in some parts of the world where they can, if it's under a certain threshold, they don't have to label it or they don't have to even acknowledge it. It's not even that. It's like 0 additives. You can have approved ingredients, which are all naturally harvested plants, koji, which is this indigenous mold, yeast, and water. That's it. Oh, and time, time, not thyme. Those 5 things are allowed to be incorporated into the drink, and that's it. And what you have is what you get. So the fermentation is really important. It's a long, very careful fermentation. The other cool thing about shochu, and this is also rare, is it's single pot distilled. And for the lay person, that probably makes no sense. But what I can say about a pot still, which is the traditional still, it's the oldest type of still, is that it is not good at creating lots of alcohol, but it is good at preserving the nature of the fermentation. So when you're trying to make a whiskey, for instance, you start by fermenting a beer, and then you put the beer in the still, turn on the heater, and the alcohol will evaporate first, and you collect that alcohol in a tube. You recondense it with cold water on the outside, and it turns into a purified form of the beer. Basically, whiskey without the oak. Okay? So you need the cask in order to turn that spirit into a whiskey, but in whiskey, they don't just distill it once because the ethanol isn't high enough. There's not enough alcohol in it. So they take that wash, they take that spirit that comes out of the still, and they put it back in and they distill it again. And then they might distill it again after that. And that continues to increase the amount of alcohol and decrease the influences from the fermentation. It's handy because if you had a really fast, rushed, kind of yucky fermentation, the still can strip out a lot of the negative aromas and really off flavors. But if you only use that still once, you sort of forfeit that ability, the mulligan aspect of distillation, which is the cleanup abilities of a still if you use it multiple times. In Japan, they don't allow it. You can use it once, and what you have is what you get. Garbage in, garbage out on a pot still. So you have to have a beautiful, very aromatic fermentation that goes into it in order to get something that you can sell. And it will smell like what it's made from. A green tea shochu will smell like green tea. A kokuto sugar shochu will smell like a very light rum. It's a really beautiful aspect of Japanese culture that nobody's ever heard of before. And it's huge. It's Japan's best kept secret. There was in 2022, there was more shochu made in Japan than tequila in Mexico. Now, 68% of that volume in Mexico was exported in 2022, while less than 0.1% of Japanese shochu ever left Japan. We keep all the good stuff to ourselves. You can see a lot of it behind me. I'm a big part of the problem. I acknowledge that. But I am also trying to be part of the solution. I'm trying to bring these drinks to folks all over the world. They are simple on paper spirits. In reality, they're beautiful, nuanced things that are very difficult to make well.
No, that's really cool. And that's why I was saying earlier, like, you are an artist, right? And so it's almost like you first learn how to draw with crayons and colored pencils, and you thought that was the way art was. And then all of a sudden, this world of acrylic paints and epoxy and all these other things started coming into play. You're like, oh my goodness, like, the world isn't just this way. Like, brewing, brewing or distilling isn't just this way. And so I think that's so awesome. And I haven't heard of all the different kinds of Japanese spirits, but I do have two of my best friends that are Japanese that have been over there, and I have tried a Japanese spirit. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what it was, but I remember it definitely did not taste like anything that I've had out in the States. And that's in a good way, right? And I'm not a huge drinker or anything, but it was definitely interesting to taste something that was completely foreign to my taste buds in terms of like alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Now you said that through the spirits and stuff, when you were talking, you kept using the word mold, right? And the first time you said it, I was thinking like a cast iron mold, right? But then when you started talking, I was like, oh wait, you're talking about like a mold, similar to like a mold that's grows on your food if you leave it in the fridge. Obviously, different aspect. So how is that mold cultivated, essentially, right? Because it's a mold.
It's obviously a naturally occurring microorganism, a filamentous mold, and it's been used forever in Japanese cuisine to assist with fermentation. The key point is grains in general, rice in particular, is nothing like a grape. A grape is a beautiful thing because it's a sugar ball, and you just need a little bit of yeast to insert itself into a fissure in that grape, and then it'll naturally ferment on its own. It'll turn itself into wine. And that's why you get, I don't know if you've ever seen the news, you get these just flocks of birds that sometimes die from alcohol poisoning because they eat fermented grapes. They're lightweights, it's their own fault. But grape wine is something that can happen pretty much on its own under the right circumstances. Whereas when you're making beer, when you're making sake, when you're making shochu from grains are not sugar capsules. They're actually starch chains, and they're complex carbohydrates. And chemically, that is essentially chains of fermentable sugars, simple soluble sugars like glucose, that are wrapped in really, really tight bundles. And even though it is technically a chain of sugar, yeast can't really get at it. Yeast can't really just like pick it out of that cord. And you need something to come in and act like scissors and chop it all up into little pieces. And that's what the malting process does in the West. And that's what koji, this mold in the East, does. They both do the same thing in very different ways. Now, the malting process for beer and whiskey is a process where you essentially you water barley and you trick it into thinking it's time to germinate. You trick it into thinking it's time to grow into a barley plant. And so it uses its own enzymes inside that little grain. The enzymatic activity will cut all of those starch chains into glucose, which is fuel. It's energy for growth. And then what they do is they lock it off. They stop that process with a kiln, with an oven. They just heat it really quickly. And then the whole thing just like goes into stasis. And then what you do is you have a grain that is essentially a grape. It's now a sugar ball, and you can ferment with that. You crack it open and you have glucose, and then you can ferment. So koji doesn't require any of that heat, but what happens is, and this again, super sexy. You're gonna love this. Everybody's gonna love this. You sprinkle this mold, which is prepared by third-party companies. They've domesticated it. They've figured out the entire way to make sure that it's completely replicable, 100%, and also very dependable. And they sell like plastic bags of this stuff, and you bring it in and you rip it open, and it's powdered mold, and you sprinkle it on top of your steamed grain, and you wrap it up in like literally blankets, like futons and stuff, to make it super humid in there. And you leave it for a good part of 12 hours to a full day. And in that humid environment, the mold just thrives. It just grows all around all of these grains. And it does the same thing that malting does. The mold is trying to survive. It needs food. It inserts feeder tubes into the grains. The feeder tubes excrete amylase and protease enzymes. And the amylase enzymes actually do the scissor thing. They cut the starch chains into sugar. And then when this is done, again, very sexy, you have fuzzy grains, but they're essentially sugar balls now. And then you can dump those into the fermenter with yeast and water, and boom, there's your fermentation. It's the same, you get to the same point, but the beautiful thing about the Japanese style is that this mold leads to umami. And that's like the buzzword today. It's just this savory, deep, rich note that we get from meat and beefsteak tomatoes and mozzarella cheese and mushrooms. And that is where all of that oomph comes from in Japanese drinks and Japanese food. It's from this mold. It's completely harmless. It's everywhere. And they've domesticated it. And it works really, really well.
That's awesome. So I mean, you mentioned earlier though too, that the Japanese spirits, it's really been a country-based thing, right? And exporting it and basically letting the world know what's really going on in terms of the spirits world has been kind of sheltered, right? So what has been one of your biggest challenges now that you are really trying to expand the audience of this art or this masterpiece that you're creating and that you've been able to experience? But what has been some of the biggest challenges that you've had to face, and how are you overcoming them?
So I got tired of how slow the pace of progress was going, probably roughly 10 years ago. In 2017 or 2018, I can't remember. I don't know why I don't remember which year, but a friend of mine and I bought 2/3 of an export company in Fukuoka, Japan, down south, which is kind of in shochu territory. And then right at the beginning of the pandemic, because we love a good challenge, I gave up my tenured position at a university in Tokyo and started an import company in New York, remotely, of course, just because I don't like to do anything the easy way. And so both sides controlled both sides of distribution, got the export and the import. Both technically, I have my hands in both of those businesses. But the challenge was, of course, number one, the pandemic. That was amazing timing. Just like, wow. March 6th, we incorporated. March 6th of 2020. Holy crap, man. that was fun. Learned a lot about myself through that process, having just given up like an amazing tenure track position, all the healthcare, everything. And my wife is like, is this going to work? I'm like, I believe it is. I believe it is. It has to work now.
Yeah.
And so, being over here makes it more challenging. But at the same time, I just really believe that it is Japan's best kept secret. And it is such a huge historically and culturally anchored thing. It's not something that was cooked up by an ad agency. This has been around for 600 years. And so it's going to hit. I don't know when, but I'm so excited about it that I'm like, why am I sort of kind of I got one foot on the sideline. Like, why? Let's just knock that up. I have an opportunity now. Let's do it. And that's what happened in 2020. And so I spend most of my time when I'm not here. This is technically my office. I know it looks like a bar, and it is the best bar in Western Tokyo for shochu, I will say. But it is technically my home office. I have my standing desk. I stand here all day. And sometimes I get to talk to interesting people, but most of the time I'm just looking at spreadsheets. And when I'm not here, I'm overseas and I'm doing education. I am working with bar staffs, liquor store floor salespeople, bartender groups like the USBG, the US Bartenders Guild, the various guilds in different cities, doing all sorts of education and just trying to get people in on the ground floor. Now, this has been great because people are very excited, but there's just too much information. It's too foreign. It's too diverse. It's hard for people to get their heads around. And at first, I'm finally answering your question. I apologize.
You're good.
At first, I was trying to bring traditional serves of Japanese spirits to American consumers. And that didn't work very well because, well, number one of the really old school ways to enjoy shochu that I like is cut 50-50 with hot water. And even to the most adventurous drinkers in the United States, that was like, why would you do that? And so I, over time, realized like, well, we're not going to get anywhere with just trying to go completely traditional from Japan and transplant it into major metro areas in the States. We're going to have to, this is business 101. This is not groundbreaking news at all. You have to meet people where they are. And so we pivoted a little bit. It was a mindset change for me. I had to stop being so precious about these things that I love so dearly. And I had to think about, well, how do spirits actually gain success in the United States? If you look at mezcal, if you look at gin, if you look at any of them, the channel is through cocktails. I mean, it's self-evident. America is where cocktails were born. And so I had to learn a whole lot of new things. I worked as a bartender briefly, and I sort of get it. I've worked behind the stick. I've worked as a barback, but I didn't necessarily anticipate that this was something I was going to have to reinvestigate. And it certainly was. And I've spent the last several years trying to figure out how to enmesh these two seemingly disparate cultural aspects. And they actually work very well together, but it just took a long time for me. And it took a long time for bartenders too, because these are lower proof spirits and they didn't automatically understand the arithmetic, the ratios of the recipes and how to adjust them to make sure that the shochu actually added to the drink and wasn't just simply overwhelmed by the other ingredients. So it's been a learning experience, but we've been making progress. Our sales, our humble company, tiny company, we work with about probably close to 20 different distilleries now. And our sales since early 2022 are up 400%. And it's because bartenders are starting to take notice. And I'm so grateful to bartenders in the States who tend to be very adventurous. And I've tried to do this in many parts of the world, and folks can be surprisingly conservative about, like, no, that's not how we do it. Like, yeah, no shit, that nobody does it this way. They were trying to do something really dynamic here. I need partners. Let's try something really cool. And American bartenders, for whatever reason, are much more likely to accept that risk and to accept that burden of trying to do something completely new. And I mean, New York especially, holy cow, New York, those folks, they just want to be the first to do something cool. You know, that's just how New York works. And so we've had a lot of success there, and folks just now more than ever are just looking, okay, cool. You've got this stuff. I've heard of that stuff. Do you have anything that nobody's heard of before? I'm like, all right, I love you. Yeah, we definitely do. So it's getting better. We're gaining momentum, but there's still so much work to be done. I feel very, very grateful that I'm in a position where, partly because of the people that we found on the US side, the people that we work with, our distribution partners, are so good and so into nerdy stuff like me. If it wasn't for them, then this would never work. But I'm grateful because I do wake up every day, and I know this is a mindset trick, but I actually honestly feel this. I actually do wake up and be like, good, I get to do this again. I get to do it again. I'm not forcing myself to say that. There are days where I have to force myself to say that. I'm not going to lie. But I do honestly feel like I get to keep doing this. And if I work hard enough, I'm going to get to keep doing this for the rest of my life. And that is absolutely the goal. But it won't work if I get complacent. It definitely will fall apart if I get too comfortable. And so hopefully I never will. My grandparents were very good at making sure that I never got a big head, and they like to knock me down a couple of notches. And I'm pretty good at doing that to myself as well. And I think it's very useful. I'm also good at doing a little bit of a Tom Brady, like taking things a little bit personally, like letting it light a fire. I think that's a really handy thing to have. Like, I agree. Nobody deserves any abuse whatsoever. But if you hear something, let that irk you. I think it's good, because you know what? None of us are ever going to be good enough. We're never going to be perfect at what we do. And if you don't accept that, then there's nothing I can do to help you. But if you can thrive and use that as oil for the fire, there are good things coming for you, my friend. There definitely are. You just have to keep going in the same direction.
No, I think that is so true. And it's funny. I'm smiling right now because I literally just did a live episode the other day, and that's exactly what I was talking about. Is resilience is a necessity, right? And with that, there comes a dark side, right? And that dark side, it's used in a good way, right? Similar to like Kobe Bryant had the Black Mamba, and Tom Brady, right? You have those masks that you have to put on. But at the same time, like when someone tells you can't do something, or you shouldn't do something, or something's too difficult, you need to let that fire really burn. Watch, I'm gonna show you.
Watch.
Exactly. Like that's what you really thrive under, right? And so it's an amazing like mindset shift that you've had, and realize that like you do get to wake up and do something again to make yourself better, right? So that mentality of telling yourself, good, I get to do this again, right? And believe me, there are some days like myself, I'm like, I have to force myself to believe in the good, I get to do this again. But it is so true, right? When you look at it that way, everything for the rest of the day, at least, it comes from an opportunistic lens. And if you wake up and you're like, oh man, I have to do this again, now everything's going to look through that dreadful lens, right? So you've already mastered that mindset, and it's already kind of shown in volumes with everything that you've accomplished thus far, especially almost like swimming upstream to in the current spirits market, right? You're going against the grain, so to speak, and with that being said, like I think that is so awesome that you did find a market, or are starting to find a market, because I think, at least in my experience in the US, is like everyone likes those craft breweries, those craft, like the things you can only get at a local place or things that you've
Right.
never heard before. So I think the US is a huge spot for you, and it will be a huge spot for you. So I'm glad that you are starting to see that traction. Now, before we get to where people can connect with you and learn more about your company and everything like that, and don't sell yourself short when you say you have a small company, because one, your company, you've been able to establish in 2 different, not states, but continents, right? And countries, right? That's a huge thing, right? And honestly, it kind of is mind-boggling. And not just have your spirits company in 2 different, countries and continents, but also you opened up remotely a business on the East Coast, right? An import business. That's not something that people just do, right? So that, don't sell yourself short on saying that it's a small company. Like your company is a growing company, right? It's not a small company, it's a growing company, right? You 400x there. So the last thing I want to leave with is, do you have a legacy wall, right? And the Christopher Pellegrini legacy wall, it is this wall that you get to leave one lasting message for the up and coming generations on your journey, your experience, and your knowledge that you've accrued over the years. What would that message be?
I think the message that I would love to be put in capital letters on that wall is to stay curious and hurt no one, including yourself.
What, and can you explain that a little bit? Just because that I love it. I want you to explain it so listeners can really understand it and really take it deep to heart.
I think you need to stay open to the possibilities that are out there. And so often we get, I had visa issues, and I was just wondering, like, how long is this paycheck going to last? And am I going to be able to, who's my next employer? And am I going to be able to support both of us? Because my girlfriend at the time was actually in school. She was in a language program. And so often you're so just stressed out about that. If there's a way for you to breathe, if you can take the moments to focus on yourself, figure out why you're reacting negatively to things, and really ponder that. At least as stressed as you are, give yourself that many tens of minutes of head time to figure out why you're reacting to these things in the way that you are. It's stress. It's going to make you do weird things. We talked about culture shock before. It's all stress. But you have to do yourself that favor of giving yourself the time to understand why you are responding in these ways. You got to breathe. You got to give yourself that headspace. And if you do, you'll start to see, I believe, there are extreme cases where you really have to deal with things right then and there. And I totally get that. But you'll begin to see in many instances that there are chances for you to sort of take a step back and reassess, like, am I doing the important things that I need to be doing? And what can I be doing a little bit more effectively? And then if you're able to afford yourself enough space, you can start to think like, well, what do I really want to be doing? And that's where you're really being kind to yourself. You also need to allow your partner to do the same thing. And you need to allow all the other people that you have welcomed into your life to do the same thing and support them in that. And that's where the kindness goes here, which is often forgotten, and it's not taught sometimes. And it goes to all the people that you keep close to you. And if everybody supports each other in that way, then there's a lot of space for curiosity. There's a lot of space for doing the things that would really make our lives so much more enjoyable. Now, most of us don't get that. Most of us don't have that. Most of us, now I'm sure you've had this before, you come up with an idea and somebody will tell you 10 reasons. They just woke up 15 seconds ago and they gave you 10 reasons why it's not going to work. Like, you haven't even had coffee yet, and you are just like trying to drag me down. That happens to everybody. So we need to try to not be that person. And it's about like creating the space for yourself and for the people that you love to get out there and take risks, be curious, and do the things that might actually be the trigger to just the most amazing life they could have ever imagined.
That's so awesome. And it is so true that right there is a mic drop in itself. Christopher, where can people, connect with you, learn more about your company, and really learn more about, the things you have going on with Japanese spirits?
So Honkaku Spirits, I know that sounds like a mouthful. HONKAKU spirits.com is our company's website. And there's a little shop on there. You can actually buy stuff online in some states. There are some states that you can't. I'm sorry to all my folks back in Vermont, can't ship to you because your government's laws are dumb. That's all I have to say about that. And there are several states like that. Vermont's one of them. It's a so-called control state. So we can't actually ship spirits into Vermont. Please work on that, because I would love for my family to be able to buy our stuff. But that's a great way to find information about shochu and awamori. And then also, if you wanted to purchase product online. But in major metro markets, shochu is available, and you should be able to run into it in liquor stores and in better cocktail restaurants. If you want to learn a little bit more about shochu, I published the shochu handbook 10 years ago now, back in July. It's available on Amazon. And I'm very, very reachable through Instagram, just my full name, Christopher Pellegrini. I have people from all over the world DMing me photos of restaurant and bar menus that have a shochu section. And they're just like, what should we order? This is really cool. They have like 4 or 5 shochu. I'm like, and if I'm on my phone, I will respond. And I'll be like, oh, second one, drink it on the rocks. And, no introductions are necessary. It's just like, I want to help you have the best possible evening and purchase experience that you possibly can. So if there's any way that I can help, you can just DM me and I'd be happy to chip in. But Christopher Pellegrini at your service. I hope that that's the case for many years to come. And I hope that at some point I'll be able to come to your town and talk shochu, and then we'll be able to kanpai together. So onward and upward, everyone. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you so much, Christopher. Like, guys, all those links, his Instagram, the book link, and the website will all be in the show notes. They'll all be at the top of the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, check in the description. If you're listening on the podcast, it is still there. Make sure you guys share this episode with a friend, right? Even if you're not into spirits, you can't tell me that Christopher's journey and his resilience and his pivots haven't inspired you, and I know it'll inspire someone else in your life. So make sure you guys share this episode with a friend. But like always, guys, we love you guys. We appreciate you, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
No negative vibes, only positive thoughts. Just in the game of life, mindset causes stress. Got my mind on the prize, I can't be distracted. I stay on my grind, no time to be slacking.